Okay, so are you ready for this? We are diving into the world of stealth fighter jets and international relations.
Sounds pretty intense, right?
It is, but trust me, it's fascinating stuff. Think Top Gun, but with real world implications for countries like India and Pakistan.
High stakes.
Exactly. You guys have been sending in articles about Pakistan buying those Chinese J-35A stealth fighters.
Yeah, I've seen those.
Well, this Eurasian Times article dives right into that. It brings up some big questions for the region, how this is all going to play out. That's what we're unpacking today. Talking about a possible arms race.
Yeah, could be. Could be a big deal. A lot at stake when you think about how this could shift the balance of power.
Exactly. And this article, it jumps right in, claims that Pakistan's already approved buying these J-35As.
Wow.
And get this, they could be operational in just 24 months. That's crazy fast.
Yeah, that's fast.
Now, there's no official confirmation yet, but the Pakistani Air Force chief, he did hint at acquiring the J-31. That's the J-35A's predecessor, right?
It is.
So fill us in. What's the deal with these jets?
So think of the J-35A as like a really souped-up J-31.
Yeah.
China basically redesigned it for export, and they've just loaded it with upgrades.
Okay, like what? What kind of upgrades are we talking
Oh,
about?
we're talking, more powerful engines, the WS-19 engines, for a major performance boost, also a top-tier radar system, better sensors, even like improved aerodynamics.
Wow.
And of course, it's stealthier too. Not to mention, it's got a wider range of weapons. You're looking at some pretty advanced air-to-air and air-to-ground missiles.
Serious firepower, then.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is that the J-35A's avionics are supposedly comparable to China's J-20, their top-of-the-line fighter.
Really?
Yeah, so that's a huge leap forward.
Okay, so that begs the question, what does all this mean for India? They're practically neighbors, and these J-35s, they're designed to be super hard to detect, right?
Right. Imagine you're trying to defend your airspace, but the enemy has like this invisibility cloak,
Yeah.
thanks to stealth tech.
Yeah.
It makes those fighters really difficult for radar to pick up. And that obviously gives them a massive advantage, especially if things were ever to escalate.
Okay, that's a little unsettling. But this isn't the first time Pakistan's acquired advanced jets, right? They recently got those J-10Cs from China, too. How do those measure up?
Yeah, the J-10C, while not a true stealth fighter, it is a very capable fourth-generation plus aircraft.
What does that mean, exactly?
That means basically it's got upgraded technology and capabilities, puts it a step ahead of older fourth-generation jets. It has some stealth features, advanced weapons, really powerful engines, makes it highly maneuverable.
How does it compare to what India's got, like their Su-30 MKIs?
Good comparison. The J-10C is lighter, and it carries less than the Su-30 MKI, but it does have better avionics,
Ah, okay.
like an ASA radar, which is much more advanced and harder to jam. Plus, the J-10C is way more cost-effective.
So they've already got the J-10Cs, and now potentially adding these J-35As. I mean, what's the message here? It seems like Pakistan is really upping their air power game.
It definitely shows like a commitment to modernizing their air force quickly.
Yeah.
And adding these Chinese jets, it really could signal a big shift in, the balance of power in the region.
Yeah, for sure. The article makes a pretty bold prediction, actually, saying that by 2030, Pakistan could have 2 squadrons of J-35As.
Wow.
That's about 40 fighters. And they're saying that India might not even have a single stealth fighter by then. They're calling it a stealth gap,
Yeah.
which sounds pretty alarming.
Yeah, it is a serious concern, If that prediction comes true, Pakistan would have a real advantage if any conflict were to break out.
Yeah.
Remember, we're talking about aircraft designed to be invisible to radar.
Yeah.
Extremely difficult to engage with.
Right, and you mentioned earlier that China developed some pretty high-tech missiles for the J-20 and the J-35A. How do those factor in?
Oh yeah, those missiles make the situation even trickier for India. They're designed to be fired from a distance, potentially before Indian radar systems even know that the J-35A is there.
Oh.
So you got that combo, stealth and that long-range strike capability. That's a huge challenge for conventional air defenses.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So it's not just about having these stealth fighters, it's also the powerful weapons they can deploy, right?
Exactly.
The article points out that India is trying to develop its own stealth fighter, the AMCA, as part of their Make in India initiative. But that program's still in development, right? Could be delays.
Right. And while Make in India has some good goals, it does face a lot of obstacles.
Like what?
There's a lot of bureaucracy, a lack of trust in the private sector, even issues with foreign interference. All that can slow things down.
So while Pakistan is going all in on these advanced jets, India is trying to build up its own defense industry, which takes time. Can they catch up?
Hmm.
Can India rely solely on this Make in India strategy while Pakistan is getting all this high-tech stuff from China?
Well, it's a risky strategy. The situation is evolving quickly. And, ignoring the immediate threat while focusing only on long-term development could be a major gamble. We can actually look at what's happening in Ukraine, for a good example of why that matters.
Yeah, that's a good point. I remember reading that in the article. Let's talk about Ukraine and what lessons India might be able to learn from what's happening over there. The conflict in Ukraine has been dragging on for a while, and it seems like just having enough weapons is a big deal over there.
Oh, absolutely. It really highlights how important it is to have enough aircraft, especially when you have a large battlefront to cover and the fighting is prolonged. Attrition, it's a real factor in modern warfare.
So we've got this potential stealth gap forming between India and Pakistan. Pakistan is getting these advanced Chinese jets. India is working on its own program, but facing those roadblocks we talked about. What does all this mean for India? What are their options here?
It's a tough spot, right? They're trying to build their domestic defense industry, but they also have to deal with this rapidly changing threat.
Yeah.
So they need to find a way to address this immediate challenge from Pakistan while still investing in those long-term solutions, like the AMCA stealth fighter.
It's like trying to juggle chainsaws, right? Can't drop either one, so how can they tackle both of these?
It's not just about fighter jets either. They need to think about their entire air defense network, things like radar systems, surface-to-air missiles, electronic warfare capabilities.
So it's a multi-layered problem.
It is
It needs a pretty comprehensive solution. What are some of the things that India could do?
Well, one option is to look into buying stealth fighters from another country in the short term.
Okay.
Something to bridge the gap while they're still working on the AMCA.
Are there any specific aircraft that would be like a good fit for them?
Well, the American F-35 comes to mind. It's a top-of-the-line, fifth-generation stealth fighter,
Yeah.
and, several countries are already using it.
That would definitely send a signal. But buying American jets,
Yeah.
wouldn't that be a big change for India? I mean, they've always tried to stay non-aligned, right?
It would be a major shift in their foreign policy, that's for sure. But the world's changing, and India might need to rethink some of those traditional alliances.
What about their Make in India program? Is there any way to speed that up?
Well, there are a few things they could try. One is to cut through all the red tape that bogs down these defense projects.
Yeah.
They could also work on building more trust, more cooperation between the government and private companies.
The article mentions foreign interference as a problem, too. What can they do about that?
That's a tricky one. It's going to take a mix of diplomacy, intelligence gathering, and counterintelligence to stop other countries from trying to, sabotage or slow down these programs.
So no easy answers.
Not really, no.
Complicated problem. Needs a carefully thought out approach. Let's go back to how this affects the whole region for a minute. You mentioned earlier that Pakistan getting these Chinese jets could shift the balance of power. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Sure. Think about it this way. India and Pakistan already have a tense relationship.
Mm.
And then you add stealth fighters into the mix.
Yeah.
Adds a whole new layer of complexity and unpredictability. Pakistan might feel emboldened to take more risks, which could increase the chances of miscalculations and escalation.
So this goes beyond just two countries arguing over jets. This is about, like, regional stability, keeping things from boiling over.
Exactly. This situation really highlights how important diplomacy and communication are, for managing these tensions and preventing things from spiraling out of control.
Speaking of diplomacy, what role can other countries play in all of this?
That's a critical point. The global community has a huge stake in preventing a conflict in this region. Countries like the U.S., Russia, and European nations, they can use their influence to encourage both India and Pakistan to show restraint, and look for diplomatic solutions.
It sounds like we're dealing with a lot of moving parts here. We've got the technology, the strategy, geopolitics, and then the human factor of diplomacy and trying to resolve conflicts.
It is a lot to process, but it's crucial to understand all these different angles, if we want to make sense of what the region is facing and how we might get to a more peaceful and secure future.
Well said. You mentioned earlier that there's a risk of miscalculation or things escalating. Can you give us like a real-world example of how that might actually play out?
Sure. Let's say there's a border incident, maybe a skirmish between troops, or one side violates the other's airspace. In the past, these situations could be handled through established protocols or back-channel communications. But if one side has a big advantage because of stealth technology,
Yeah.
the other side might feel like they have to respond with force. and things could escalate really quickly.
So just having these advanced weapons can actually create like a climate of mistrust and
Yeah.
fear, making it even harder to deal with a crisis.
Exactly. It's a classic security dilemma where one country trying to make itself safer actually makes everyone less safe. Creates a vicious cycle of mistrust that can lead to conflict.
We've talked about technology, strategy, diplomacy, but this all comes down to people in the end, right? Real lives are at stake if tensions escalate into a war.
That's a point we can't afford to forget. It's easy to get caught up in discussing, military hardware and strategic calculations, but we need to remember the human cost of conflict.
Yeah.
It's a sobering reminder that peace and security should always be the top priority.
Absolutely. We all have a responsibility to work towards that. So far, we've explored, the capabilities of these Chinese stealth fighters, why Pakistan wants them, the challenges India faces with its own defense industry, and how all of this affects the region. We've also talked about how vital diplomacy is. Before we wrap things up, I want to touch on one more thing the article mentioned, the psychological impact of these technological advancements.
Oh, that's a fascinating angle.
Oh.
Technology never exists in a vacuum. It has a real impact on how people think and act.
Exactly. So what are your thoughts on the psychological side of this stealth gap?
Well, on one hand, having stealth technology, it can give a country's military and political leaders a sense of confidence, maybe even arrogance. They might start to think they have an unbeatable advantage and can, do whatever they want.
That sounds like a dangerous way of thinking.
It can be, especially if it leads to reckless behavior or overconfidence. On the flip side, the country that feels like it's lagging behind technologically might feel vulnerable, insecure, and that could make them overreact to situations or misjudge them.
So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah,
The technology itself can be destabilizing even if it's never actually used in a fight.
exactly. That's why communication, confidence-building measures, clear ways to resolve conflicts, these are so important. Those things can help manage those psychological effects, stop things from spiraling into mistrust and hostility.
Wow. That's a pretty heavy thought. It feels like we've really dug deep into this issue.
We have. It's been a thought-provoking conversation, and I hope you've gained a better understanding of the complexities at play here.
I know I have, but there's always more to learn, right?
Always. That's what makes knowledge so great. It's an ongoing journey of exploration and discovery.
I love that. Before we sign off, any last words for our listener, something to think about as they, try to navigate this complicated world?
I would just say that in this day and age, with technology changing so rapidly, it's more important than ever to think critically, question everything, seek out different points of view, and have real conversations. The future isn't set in stone. We shape it with the choices we make today.
That's great advice. We can't just passively absorb information, right? We need to actively engage with the world around us. As we wrap up this dive into stealth fighters, international relations, and the future of warfare, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listener walks away with?
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful message. We can't just sit back and let things happen. We have to be, active participants in shaping the future. So as we wrap up this dive into stealth fighters and international relations and the future of warfare, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listener walks away with? You know what's fascinating here? It's how technology, strategy, and psychology are all intertwined, right? You can't separate them. The acquisition of advanced weapon systems like stealth fighters, it has these profound implications, not just on the battlefield, but on the minds of policymakers
Yeah.
and the broader geopolitical landscape.
It's like a ripple effect, right?
Yeah.
One change in the technological landscape, it creates these waves that spread throughout the entire system.
Precisely. And those waves can be unpredictable, right?
Yeah.
That's why it's so crucial to anticipate potential consequences, to weigh the risks and benefits carefully, and to pursue policies that promote, stability and dialogue rather than escalation and conflict.
It's a reminder that we're all interconnected. And the choices we make, whether in technology, politics, or diplomacy, have these far-reaching implications.
Indeed. And those implications extend far beyond our immediate borders. And even our lifetimes.
Wow.
We have a responsibility to the future generations to create a world that's more peaceful, just, and sustainable.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. It's been an enlightening journey, and I hope you feel empowered to continue exploring these complex issues.
I agree. The more informed and engaged we are as citizens, the better equipped we'll be to navigate the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead.
So to our listener out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep seeking knowledge, and keep striving to make the world a better place.
And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Share your thoughts, engage with others, and let's continue to explore these vital issues together.
Until next time, stay curious.